So welcome back to our live coverage of the United Nations climate talks here in Cancun in Mexico. We've got the Fossil of the Day awards going on behind us. That's an award that's given daily to the country or the block of countries that have been holding the talks back. So I apologise if there's a little bit of music that we have to compete with here. That said, we have had somebody record the awards, so we'll bring those to you later. I'm going to try and give you a bit of a wrap-up of the news of what's happened today so far, and then in about 10 minutes we're going to begin our daily chat show where we talk about some of the hot topics. So at these United Nations climate talks, there's two tracks to the negotiations, and one is focused on achieving long-term solutions to climate change and the global climate crisis, and that's known as the long-term cooperative action track, and the other is focused on committing rich countries to short-term emissions cuts, and that's known as the Kyoto Protocol track. Now, these two tracks of the talks are politically tied together, so it's impossible to separate them completely. But nonetheless, they do operate in separate plenary halls, and they're discussed in separate buildings. Now, there's going to be new negotiating texts for both of these tracks today. One of them was released this afternoon, and countries have been responding to it. And the other, the Kyoto Protocol tracks text, is due to be released later this evening. These papers are what the environmental ministers from around the world will be discussing next week, and they'll form the basis for the negotiations. So what does this mean? Why is it relevant? Well, in short, what it means is that now we've got the new negotiating text on the table here at the UN climate talks. We can expect the frictions and the tensions between countries to become evident. We will be able to see what countries agree on and what they disagree on. So it should be that in the next 24 to 48 hours we really get an idea of the prospects for significant movement on the legal framework of these talks. And what we're aiming for here in the long term is nothing short than a global treaty to solve climate change. Of course, that's not the ambition here in Cancun. They're aiming for a package of smaller agreements to form the basis of these talks. There's a feeling that the long-term cooperative action track has scope for progress. That if we can get all the world's countries to come together, they might be able to agree some basic kind of framework and some small packages of text and really push forward on that front. The Kyoto Protocol track, however, which is where rich countries are being asked to commit to short-term emissions cuts, that's looking less promising. Rich countries have indicated in closed meetings that they don't think there will be an agreement. But this hasn't stopped poor countries and left-wing governments in Bolivia and Ecuador and Venezuela, for example, coming out and saying that they want some kind of legally binding commitment to emissions cuts as part of this agreement. So there's this real tension here between rich countries coming out and saying we're not going to agree to it, and poor countries saying that actually they think it's essential. If it emits the kind of demands that poor countries are calling for as part of the Kyoto Protocol, then and instead kind of goes for a weaker agreement based on the Copenhagen Accord, which was agreed this time last year, and was pushed by some rich countries and especially America, then I think we can expect to see some of the poorer states saying that they think it's unfair and that the talks might slow down a little bit. Now, of course, while the legal framework of what goes on here doesn't ever fail to kind of provide drama, actually we need to remember that it's the critical building blocks, some of the really important issues that practically affect people's lives on the ground. There is scope for progress there. So we're talking things like deforestation, climate finance, monitoring, review and verification, which is a horrible way of saying are people actually making the emissions cuts that they're promising to make, and also technology transfer. And now these are all issues that really affect people on the ground. So deforestation for communities living in these forests is a massive issue. For the ecosystems there is a massive issue, and also for all of us around the world. Of course, the forests are a huge carbon sink, and chopping them down or burning them is not great for anybody. Climate finance is absolutely critical for people around the world. We've spoken to delegates from the Maldives, for example, who've told us that that country now is spending more on trying to adapt to the impacts of climate change, on trying to protect its small island from rising seawater, from lack of access to fresh water, from increasing temperatures, than they're actually spending on the education of their young people. So you have an entire country here now which is having to spend more money just on surviving than it is on its future. And similarly, technology transfer. If we're expecting other countries, if we're expecting poorer, more developing countries to do their bit and to reduce their own emissions, then we need to help them. We need to help them reduce their emissions by giving them the appropriate technology. So as we move into the second week of these talks, we're expecting ministers to arrive, and campaigning groups and activists here are working on their messaging. They're wondering how they're going to be able to persuade countries to really make progress and kick on and up the pace a little bit. Now, one senior campaigner spoke to OneClimate earlier today, and he told us that he thought the EU needed bashing about the head a little bit, because lots of people are frustrated about the role of the EU. This is a rich world power. Lots of countries gathered together with an enormous potential to influence these talks, but they just don't seem to be kind of really moving forward. Not making the commitments that people might expect of them, and not making the commitments of emissions reductions that people might expect of them. So we'll see in the coming week whether they're the focal point for campaigners' activism. Another text that is due to be released today discusses deforestation in the developing world. This is known as REDD, which stands for Reducing Emissions Through Deforestation and Degradation. This is a set of policies which has been significantly weakened over the last year. So in Copenhagen in 2009, that was the last major climate talks, and people feel that since then actually this set of policies has got less secure. Of particular concern, there's a major loophole whereby countries only have to measure deforestation at the local level. So the risk here is that you stop deforestation in one province and it simply moves up the road. And obviously that's not a satisfactory situation for anybody. If you're paying somebody not to chop down a forest, it's no good if they move 5 kilometres up the road and chop down another one instead. It doesn't benefit anybody. One of the lead negotiators from an African country actually wandered past earlier today, and he said to me Saudi Arabia was blocking progress on this front. And he looked at me and he said, Saudi Arabia does not have one tree. So, there's one of the tensions that you often see at these talks is that we're looking for consensus, and in order to come to an agreement where everybody has a fair say and where it's something that can be practically implemented around the world, you need everybody to agree. But of course that does allow some countries to block progress. Finally, you might have heard my colleague Joanne report earlier in the week that countries feel disillusioned with the Copenhagen Accord. This is an agreement which was made last year in Copenhagen in Denmark at the last big UN climate talks. Another negotiator for a country who's signed on to the accord said that they were promised that if they did agree with this accord, then they would receive climate finance in exchange for it. Now, they tell me this hasn't happened, and if you've been following the WikiLeaks scandal online, which is where a website called WikiLeaks has released thousands of US embassy cables, you'll see that actually many countries around the world came under enormous pressure to join this Copenhagen Accord agreement, which was pushed by the US, and were effectively promised money for doing so. So these countries that haven't released haven't received that money are now getting upset and thinking, why did we sign on to this? So I think you might be able to expect some disgruntlement to be evident in the coming days if that bubbles to the surface. We're going to move to our chat show in a couple of minutes. We've got a couple of guests lined up for you. Jamie, my trusty technical assistant, is just going to run a short video whilst we get the guests lined up. So we'll be back with you in a couple of minutes.